All right. Hello again, Avengers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is Daily Vlog 2025, number 147. And today, we are going to answer the question, what is a scion, or a psionicist, or whatever you want to call it, because New Unearthed Arcana came out, I think today. It's either today or yesterday. And it is previewing a new class, the Scion, and effectively reintroducing the idea of psionics to the D&D 5.5. Now, I read through it. I'm not particularly fond of it, but there's a few things in there that might hint something else coming in the future. So I'm excited about that, but I think this is another misstep. And in order to explain why I think this is a misstep, we need to talk about what are psionics in general as they relate to kind of Dungeons and Dragons and TTRPGs as a whole, and why this is such a misstep. So, let's talk about psionics in general. Do some history lessons. Psionics effectively are just psychic powers. In a world of magic, especially when you have spells like telekinesis, the idea of also having psychic powers doesn't really make sense, because anything you could do with your psychic powers, there's already a spell to do that. And quote-unquote psychic powers in general tend to be a more science fiction thing than a fantasy thing. In fantasy, anytime you have unexplained phenomena, it's magic. In science fiction, anytime you have unexplained phenomena, it's generally going to be psychic powers, alien technology, or if you get into the sci-fi horror genre, it has something to do with the unknowable. And there's a lot of kind of bleed over between all three of those ideas. Like a lot of eldritch creatures also have some things that would be considered psychic powers. A lot of aliens have the ability to, communicate things with their minds. So, in a fantasy world, the idea of also introducing psychic powers requires you to kind of define, well, what's the difference between psionics and magic? And when they were first introduced, in a supplement called Eldritch Wizardry, which came out in 76. So it was officially Dungeons and Dragons Supplement 3 Eldritch Wizardry. So it was originally introduced really, really early, but it really wasn't very well defined. And then when we get to AD&D first edition, again, we have psionics in there. There wasn't a particular class that kind of focused or specialized or anything like that on psionics. They did introduce, apparently in Dragon Magazine issue 78, there was an unofficial class called the Psionicist that was introduced. But psionics in general were kind of very, very loosely defined as, well, they're not magic, but they kind of do some things that magic can already do. And so, yes, they technically exist in the original Dungeons and Dragons and in first edition, but they really weren't very well defined. And when we look at other systems, like a lot of times, psionics or psychic powers and things like that in non-fantasy based tabletop RPGs are just their version of magic. So what I want to kind of sit down and define is the idea of psionics and magic coexisting. so that, like, a really, really good example. Jedi in Star Wars are space wizards. They have space magic, and their version of the weave is called the Force. Ooh, Maxi Big the Force. What that smells, think of with. Uh, and so they're basically considered space wizards. But if there was actual magic, they would be more akin to like psychics, because a lot of the stuff that they can do, they can move stuff with their mind, they can kind of convince people of the things and confuse their mind, and then they can also do other things, like they can use their mind to increase their strength and do other things. It makes them think faster and things like that. All of these things tend to be in there, but in a world without magic, it's just kind of, that's magic. So and that's in original D&D and AD&D First Edition. Psionics were kind of introduced, with the world were the rules were kind of loosey goosey. There isn't really a whole lot other than, well, psychic stuff exists too, which was kind of the, like, that was kind of the theme of early D&D supplements, was kind of the idea, if you're running a game and one of your players goes, well, what about this thing? And then you go, oh yeah, that totally existed in my campaign setting too. And right. This is how it works. It's kind of how things were introduced in early Dungeons and Dragons. And people go, well, what about this? They go, yeah, that totally exists in D&D. Here's some rules for it. But it wasn't really well defined. A lot of that changed when we get to second edition, specifically when we start dealing with Dark Sun. But psionics predates the Dark Sun by a little bit. When we get to second edition, the Complete Psionics Handbook came out in 91, a couple years after second edition came out. And this is where we start having actual kind of rules for how psionics work, and specifically how they're different from magic. So in my opinion, this is the first kind of example of a psionics system that actually can exist with a magic system, because they actually work different. In a similar way that magic had schools, psionic powers had disciplines. And those disciplines have changed over the years. But they are clairsentience, clairvoyance type stuff. Meta-creativity, which is basically kind of psionic conjuring. Meta-psionics, which is psionic powers that just boost other psionic powers. Psychokinesis. It's basically telekinesis, but they like psycho instead. Psychometabolism, which is being able to psychically kind of modify your own body. Psychoportation, teleportation, and then telepathy. Of those 6 different things, the ones that I have seen most often associated specifically with psionics are psychometabolism, psychokinesis, and telepathy. Having an entire discipline just about teleportation tends to go to the wayside. Meta-psionics is generally kind of just added in either as a generic psionic ability as opposed to it being specifically meta-psionics, or it's folded into the other disciplines. And then clairsentience, again, a lot of times that will be folded in with telepathy because it is a mind power. And so a lot of times, so the ones that tend to be most commonly seen are your psychokinesis, psychometabolism, and telepathy. So when we get to second edition, this is where we start having them classified into different disciplines. And the other thing that was different about psionics that was introduced in second edition is psionics didn't use the Vancian magic system. If you're not familiar with that term, the Vancian magic system just refers to spell levels effectively. There was an author that I always forget their actual name, but it has something to do with the word Vance, and that's where we get the Vancian system from. And basically, in the books, what would happen was magic users in that world, in the morning, they would basically prepare spells that they would cast later on the day, and then any time they cast a spell, it was actually removed from their mind. They would forget the spell as they cast it, and that was translated to the traditional Dungeons and Dragon magic system that we all know and some of us love, where you have spell slots and levels of spells and the things like that. That's the Vancian magic system, and it's been used in a lot of other things. Early Final Fantasy games used a variation on the Vancian magic system. However, psionics had a different limited resource for using their psionic abilities called psionic strength points. And in second edition, there was actually a completely different combat system used for psychic combat, because having a sword and heavy armor was completely useless for battling someone in their mind. So they created a completely different psychic combat system, which was a bit convoluted, to say the least. The other thing that was kind of interesting about psionics, again, nowadays, at least with the people that I speak with, psionics is most closely associated with Dark Sun, because psionics is an essential part of the Dark Sun campaign setting. However, this predates Dark Sun existing, and so they actually gave suggestions on how you could implement psionics into various campaign settings. And there was actually in Dragon Magazine issue 174, and I'm getting all this from the Wikipedia page on psionics in Dungeons and Dragons, by the way. If anyone's wondering why I keep looking over here, it's because I'm reading off of it. So Dragon Magazine issue 174, there was an article called "Are You Having Bad Thoughts?" It was written by, according to the webpage, Ravenloft designer Bruce Nesmith. And it specifically talked about how psionics worked in Ravenloft, which makes sense. Like, psychic powers and things like that show up in horror films a lot. I mean, Carrie is a prime example of a horror film involving someone developing psychic abilities and then bad things happening. So introducing psionics to a horror type setting kind of fits really, really well. Then we have the Dark Sun campaign setting that comes out, and Dark Sun makes psionics an essential part of the system for a couple of big reasons. One, there's no divine magic in Dark Sun. All the gods are gone. And so you basically just have variations on arcane magic that can sometimes act divine, with druids and clerics actually having to use elemental magic and worship elemental spheres. The other thing was magic in general had to be done either through defiling or preserving. I made an entire video talking about what is a defiler and how can we create something like that in a TTRPG. So in order to have something fantastical that was a little bit more readily available, they heavily embraced psionics to the point where in the Dark Sun campaign setting, everybody had the ability to have at least some minor psionic abilities. When you look at later editions, like the 4th edition version of the Dark Sun campaign setting, part of building a Dark Sun character, other than starting them at level 3, because if they're level 1, they'll die, is you get to pick what's called a wild talent, which again was introduced in the original the Dark Sun or the revised Dark Sun. I can't remember which one it was. And basically, it just gave you access to some sort of psionic ability. And Dark Sun, and specifically the revised Dark Sun campaign setting, is when we really got a very clear idea of how psionics worked. The different disciplines of psionics were tied to different ability scores. So, like, if you had a high constitution, you could do. I think constitution was tied to metabolics, and so that would mean that you could, do cool psychic things where you would kind of like one of my. I guess I don't know if I'd call it my favorite, but one of the psionic powers I remember most was called Animal Affinity, and basically what it would do is it allow you to create weapons. Or modify yourself based on certain animals. And one of the things you could do is basically grow claws and make attacks using claws. It was a cool ability in Dark Sun. So both the original Dark Sun and the revised Dark Sun campaign setting use psionic strength points. They also had a mental armor class, which is what would be used against psionic attacks. And for the most part, the revised Dark Sun campaign setting and technically player option skills and powers also had similar uses of psionics in it. Most people kind of agreed this is a really, really good version of psionic abilities. They work differently than spells. They're not just spells with another name. They actually do different things. They are cast differently. They have a different defense mechanism in them. And at that point, they still had the psionic combat rules. And so the actual combat that you made worked differently. They would get rid of psionic combat rules in 3rd edition, which we'll talk about in a second here, and just turn... Because basically in psionic combat, you had, like, if you were on the offensive, this is what you would do, and then you could switch to defensive. And it was kind of an almost duelist style thing. And they just turned that in 3rd edition into, well, there is an offensive psionic fighting style and a defensive psionic fighting style kind of thing. And just went with that. But for me, that's what really defines... psionics in general, is they have to use a different system than magic, which this new version of psionics doesn't. They just give them a couple new spells and go, look, it's psionics. And they should feel different than psionics. By using effectively a spell point system in opposed to the Vancian magic system, it meant that psionic abilities definitely worked differently. I don't know if this was a part of the system or it just showed up in the video game. But in Dark Sun Shattered Lands, if you were a psionicist or you just had, every character had access to psionic abilities, and as your attributes would go up, eventually you could either learn new psionic abilities or upgrade the ones that you currently had to just be more powerful, which was very, very different than leveled spells where, again, either you would cast at a higher level, which is what the later editions would do, or there would be a high level version of that spell that, would just let you do cooler things with it. Whereas the old psionic system, you literally upgraded the abilities, kind of similar to how the warlock always casts their low-level magic at whatever the highest spell slot level they have for their pact magic ability. Kind of a similar thing, but you actually got to choose which ability to kind of upgrade, and you could forego learning a new psionic ability to just upgrade one that you already had. Yeah. When we get to 3rd edition is where we start seeing, especially since third edition was already this incredibly complicated, complex system, they decided that instead of designing a new system that would allow you to use psionics in third edition, they would just tack it on to an existing system, which is much as what they've tried to do in fifth edition. And so effectively, psionicists, who are now the Psion, I believe is what they called it in third and 3.5, and what they're calling it in fifth edition, were they were kind of like sorcerers, where they could they were innate casters. Sorcerers at this point didn't have the connection with metamagic that they do in fifth edition. Anyone could use metamagic in third edition. You just had to take a feat for it. So scions were kind of like sorcerers in the idea that they were these innate spellcasters. They didn't have to prepare spells or anything like that, and they got access to a few unique psionic abilities, including an offensive psionic fighting style and a defensive psionic fighting style. That was really it. They were basically just spellcasters that slightly differently cast their spells. And it didn't particularly work very well. I don't know too many people that when you talk about psionics in third edition, they go, oh yeah, that was super awesome. I do know a lot that really enjoyed it in second edition, and we'll talk about fourth edition in a second here. So it wasn't great. There also was not an official Dark Sun campaign setting in third edition. It skipped third edition completely. There were third-party supplements that made them using the OGL, but they were not super well received. I don't think they were like, blacklisted or anything like that, but they just really weren't up to the quality of the kind of old school. They also, one of the updates did a 300-year time jump to the third edition version of Dark Sun, which was not something that a lot of people were fond of. Like, people got upset when there was a 100-year time jump in the Forgotten Realms, specifically between third edition and fourth edition. Like, people got super pissed off. 300-year time jump is crazy. And then the other one that was actually published by Paizo before they became their own company was designed to be a significantly more generic version of the Dark Sun that actually allowed you to run adventures in any era, as opposed to Dark Sun up to that point had all been like in the Dark Sun era. But the Paizo supplement would actually let you go all the way back to like the Blue era, or the Blue Age, I'm sorry, and run games like that. So it was interesting, but they weren't full campaign settings. They were mostly rules translations and rules conversions that would allow you to use third edition rules in a Dark Sun campaign. But they weren't like the Dark Sun campaign setting where they actually created a campaign setting and had adventures and custom monsters and all these things. All that stuff changed in fourth edition, where according to specifically the Dark Sun Wikipedia page, they specifically say that James Wyatt, who I believe is still working at D&D right now, he's one of the few kind of old guard that's still there. Sorry, I'm getting my drink right now. I have to open up the package. That's my drink. So, James Wyatt felt that Dark Sun would give a good example to show that D&D didn't have to be this kind of high fantasy or dark fantasy. That D&D could be utilized for a lot of different settings, and the kind of post-apocalyptic, like super gritty, dangerous, hopeless setting that Dark Sun would work really well. And the fact that Dark Sun in and of itself was very kind of action-oriented leaned pretty heavily into the heavy combat focus, some aspects of D&D, 4th edition specifically. Now, I've said many, many times, like all the people that said, well, 4th edition was just a combat simulator. No, it wasn't. It had some of the greatest role-playing systems ever introduced. But it was very heavily combat-focused, as was most of Dungeons and Dragons. Like, every single Dungeons and Dragons player's handbook, the largest portion of the rules is the rules around combat. So D&D has always been combat centric. Let's put it this way: combat has never been ignored in a D&D product ever. There have been products that have kind of ignored the role playing aspects, like the new 2024 D&D stuff, where they took out as much lore as they possibly could. They're kind of ignoring the role playing aspect, and I think we can all agree 5th edition has ignored the exploration aspect pretty spectacularly. Combat has never been ignored in Dungeons and Dragons. So, Wyatt decided that they were going to update Dark Sun to 4th edition. And this one was actually really, really interesting and fun. First of all, you had Player's Handbook 3 that came out that introduced the psionic power source. In D&D, every single class had a power source, basically what they used to fuel their powers. And up until that point, you had martial power sources, which was all the martial-based classes. You had arcane power sources, again, pretty self-explanatory. You had divine power sources. And if I remember correctly, I think psionics was the 4th power source that was introduced. Oh no, nature was the other one. So there was nature, or they called it primal then. You had primal power sources. Then they introduced psionic power sources in Player's Handbook 3. There was one other power source, which was shadow, which I believe was introduced in the heroes line, which is basically 4.5. The interesting thing about psionic classes is, other than the monk, which was its own special thing, psionic classes didn't get encounter powers. They still got dailies, they still got at wills, but they got no encounter powers. And what they had to make up for that is they would get a pool of psionic power points, and then they would use those power points to upgrade their at-wills and make them do certain things. And there were also a bunch of magic items that you could use psionic power points to make them do things. And so we go back to the idea that psionics still had the ability to do fantastical things, but they had a completely different limited resource that they would use. And their psionic power points would come back after a short rest, which in 4th edition took 5 minutes. They had encounter powers, but they worked completely differently than all the other classes. And it was a really, really cool way to deal with psionic powers. It still gave that feeling of psionic abilities technically can do things that look magical, but they work in a completely separate fashion. I really, really love the 4th edition version of Psionics. And then they introduced the Dark Sun campaign setting, and in addition to the Psionics, and they also introduced defiling and all that other stuff, they also introduced wild talents back into the system, which again, if you created a 4th edition D&D Dark Sun Kiki character, again, they started at level 3, and they got access to a wild talent, which generally just gave you access to some psionic-based cantrip or something similar to that. So every Dark Sun character in 4th edition had some psionic ability. And so that was really cool. And then 5th edition, they tried introducing the Mystic as one of the first new classes, and it did not work. It used a PowerPoint system, but because it worked so differently than the Vancine magic system, it would have taken a very, very long time to balance it against the current things. And they decided to just forget it, and the same Unearthed Arcana that introduced the Mystic also introduced the Alchemist, or not the Alchemist, the Artificer, and they just dropped the Mystic completely and focused entirely on the Artificer. Later on, introducing some psionic feats and psionic subclasses, which really were just magic feats and magic subclasses by another name. And that's what we're seeing with this new Psion. It's a spellcaster that has some slightly different spells. And that's it. I don't think it's particularly good. They do bring back the idea of an offensive psionic fighting style and a defensive psionic fighting style. And they do have a limited resource unique to them, which is their psionic dice. However, they really don't, like, they're just a limited resource. They work the exact same way as maneuvers do, where you have a limited number of maneuver dice, and you can use them. Like, they're effectively a psychic battle master that is spell focused versus weapon focused. Like, that's really all they are, and it's really kind of upsetting because I would love to see an actual reintroduction of psionics. The problem with introducing psionics to 5th edition specifically is 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons is inexorably tied to magic. 100% of classes in Dungeons and Dragons have at least one magic subclass. 100% of them. There is not there is a magic barbarian. And if that doesn't sound like nonsense to you, I don't know what does. All of the not purely martial classes, which there really aren't that many. You basically just have the fighter and the barbarian are the only two purely martial classes. Every other Kikik class that isn't purely martial has been given some sort of magic ability. The ranger is a half. The ranger's a half caster. The paladin is a half caster. And then again, there's a couple different fighter subclasses that give you access to magic. The Eldritch Knight is the most common, but Arcane Archer is a magic. This is subclasses. Well, there's a ton of feats that will let you just splash magic onto your character, and the monsters. Like, once you get to a high enough level, almost every single monster will have resistance to non-magic weapons. So creating a class that doesn't use magic in any way, shape, or form is really, really hard, because the magic system is so ingrained in D&D 5th edition. And I think that is the problem that they keep having with this is Psion, because they don't want to spend the time and effort to create a new psionics system, because not only do they have to balance it with how the Vancine magic system works and all the other classes, they also have to come up with a way that it can interact with all the monsters that are designed around the idea that you will never have an adventuring party that doesn't have access to magic. It can't happen in 5th edition. You have to have magic in your party. So let's talk about actually designing a psionicist. That's the term that I like. I've never been a big fan of the psion. I think psionicist is just cooler. So let's talk about, in our mythical world of our custom tabletop RPG that we keep designing things for, let's design a psionicist. First things, we have to define what a psionicist is. And part of that has to be we have to define what psionics is. I've kind of done it throughout this. Let's give it official definition. Psionics is mental-based abilities that exist separately from a magic system. They use a different method of inaction and are in no way connected to magic. So to me, that's what a psionics system is. They are mental-based abilities, and they're not magic. They have to work differently than magic, because if just magic by another name, there's no reason to call it psionics. Just call it psychic magic or mental magic or something like that. There's no reason to have a complete thing. So a psionicist is a character that specializes in psionics. And that's really all we need to do, because when we also define psionics as, a system of doing kind of fantastical things that's not magic, that kind of gives us an additional limitation for the psionicist as well. So the first thing we have to do to create a psionicist, we have to create a psionics system. So I think going back to what we've seen thus far, the idea of magic points, psionic points, or something like that, I think that kind of system works really well. You can just do a spell point system where psionics are spells that are cast using magic points versus the Vancian magic system. If that's what you're using for your magic system, where you have Vancian magic system, you can create your psionics as just, well, then psionics are always going to use a magic point system. And as much as that sounds like a differentiation without any real mechanical difference, using a spell point system massively changes how your magic has to work. Because, again, in a Vancian magic system, you can basically have a higher level version of the same spell, and the difference is going to be, well, I have to use a higher level spell slot to use it, and I have only so many of those. And the balance can be pretty simple. The idea of, well, if you can only cast these spells with, let's say, a 4th level spell slot, then if we put spells that we want to be balanced against each other in the same spell level, that instantly creates I can't think of the word right now. Opportunity cost. There we go. If you're not familiar with that term, opportunity cost is basically the idea of, if I do this thing, then I can't do this thing, this other thing. So is this first thing good enough that I don't mind not doing this other thing? So opportunity cost in a spell system is this is this 4th level spell worth me not being able to cast this other 4th level spell? That kind of thing. Once you go to a magic point system, all of that gets thrown out the window, because while you might organize spells into levels or tiers or whatever you want to call it, the fact that you can use the same resource to cast a 4th level spell as you can to cast a 1st level spell means you have to balance them very, very differently, because the opportunity cost aspect of it is completely gone. There still is an opportunity cost of the idea, well, is 18 spell points, is this one spell worth me not casting 3 of these other spells? But that's a different balancing system. So if you do want to go just the route of, okay, psionics are magic point based and magic is spell slot based, you could do that, and it would by necessity create 2 different working magic systems. I think that's a bit of a cop-out. So were I designing a psionic system, I actually really enjoy the idea of the 4th edition version of it, combined with a little bit of the 2nd edition version of psionics, which is basically you have these psionic abilities that have kind of base versions of them that you can choose from. And you have this pool of limited resources that we're going to call psionic power points or whatever we call it, psychic points, PP, whatever you want. And you can use that limited resource to either upgrade the abilities on the fly, or to cause them to work in slightly different ways. So, for example, let's talk about like the animal affinity psionic ability. Again, animal affinity, depending on which flavor and version you're talking about, was basically it would give you some aspect of an animal. And so at its base version, it could just be a buff of some sort. Okay, well, I'm going to give myself the eyes of an eagle, and that's going to improve my perception, maybe my accuracy when making weapon attacks, things like that. Or I'm going to give myself the strength of a bear to where it makes me stronger, maybe slightly increases the amount of damage that I do when using melee weapons. Things like that. Now, when we add in psionic powers, one aspect that you could use, or psionic power points, one aspect that you could use is just upgrade. Okay, well, I'm going to use this, but I'm going to burn a psionic power point so that instead of just a +1, I get a +2 or a +3 or something like that. And that's a really simple way of, okay, in certain situations where you just need more, then you can use these points to just pump it up. But in addition to that, with animal affinity, you could just as easily go, okay, well, I'm going to put in a few of these psionic power points, and that's going to be allowed as part of my bear, strength of the bear ability. Not only is it going to give me that mild buff to strength, I'm also going to grow claws that allow me to attack with my bare hands and to do things like that. And it can keep, as you go to higher levels, you can keep adding more things. Well, in addition to the claws, it also allows for a bleed effect, or it allows me to grapple. If I do agility of the wolf, the base version just makes me much more agile. But once I start adding things on, I can actually give myself, the jaw and the snout of a wolf, and now I can bite targets, and maybe I can grapple them with that bite and kind of tear at them, because that's what wolves do. I mean, they have claws and stuff like that, and they can claw you, but they bite. So designing your psionic abilities around that, I think, makes the most sense. To have a really, really different system. And then you just have to start kind of deciding, okay, where do I want to limit it? Do I want animal affinity to be my exclusive buffing thing, where anytime you give a bonus to an attribute, it's all going to be put on here? Or am I going to leave animal affinity to physical abilities and then have kind of the equivalent ability in the telepathic discipline? But that's how you buff your mental abilities. And then when you upgrade that, it allows for other abilities like Ego Whip and things like that, where you can actively attack people with your psychic powers. And again, I like the discipline system because it allows for a very simple kind of differentiation of, okay, where are these supposed to go? And if you require, like, if I remember correctly, in 3rd edition, you actually had to choose. You actually had to choose a discipline, and if you chose that, you would lose out on the like more powerful abilities in other disciplines. So that could be a very, very simple balancing method of if your psionicist focuses on one discipline, they get access to more powerful abilities in that discipline, but they lose access to the other two disciplines. Or if they go the more jack of all trades, they have a more wide-ranging spread of abilities, but they never are able to use the most powerful versions of those abilities. I think that provides a really, really easy, simple to understand method of balance and kind of reward for players being able to choose how they want their psionicist to work. So yeah, that's the psionic system in a nutshell. Again, obviously, to actually create a psionic system, you'd have to sit down and actually create all the different psionic powers and stuff like that. But I think that gives us enough of a baseline to understand how psionics works. Now, let's talk about our psionicist. So, and this is something that I actually do enjoy about the playtest version of psionicist, is the subclasses that they have actually allow you to play a few very, very different flavors of psionicist. They have one that actually specializes in that psychometabolism style thing where they can transform their arms into weapons and things like that. I like that idea, but I think, again, for our psionicist, I think if we, because they don't technically have the different disciplines in 5th edition, I think since we have the different disciplines, I think we can just have, for starters, the psionicist just focus on one each of the disciplines, which again, the disciplines are psychokinesis, which is moving things with your mind. You have psychometabolism, which is psychically changing how your body works. And then telekinesis, which is, or not telekinesis, telepathy, which is all the kind of internal mind reading, mystical stuff. So I think by doing that and allowing basically 4 flavors of psionicist to exist, there'd be one that focuses exclusively on each school or each discipline. And then the last one is your jack of all trades, which, depending on how balance goes, might be able to choose 2 different ones or might be able to choose all 3, or maybe depending on how many different ones they choose, whether it's 2 or 3, will give them access to different kind of levels in there. So there's a lot of choice built into it, but still is not going to feel like the kind of jack of all trades version of the psionicist, which I guess we could just call the multidisciplinist. And then each other one would just be named after the thing, like the metabolist, the telepathic one. I don't know. I can't think of an ist of that. And then the psychokinesis person. So whatever you want to call them. And yeah, the one that focuses on psychometabolism would very much be about all of their abilities would be about giving them kind of temporary modifications to how they play their character. It'd be a very physical, kind of martial-based character. Very similar if you've ever played Shadowrun. The adept in Shadowrun uses their magic basically just to kind of buff themselves. I very much could see an adept being a psychometabolism focused psionicist. And then your psychokinesis one is going to be a more ranged based class that involves just throwing projectiles and creating projectiles to throw them and things like that. You're basically kind of a psychic ranger style thing. Very easily could be a throwing weapon based class because they could control things like that. And there's a lot of different things that you could use with that, both offensive and defensive, being able to like lift things up to protect yourself while also throwing things over it, being able to physically move enemies around, things like that. Could be a very, very interesting, fun character to play. And then the telepath would be significantly more control based. They still would have damaging attacks, but they wouldn't be throwing things or things like that. They'd be psychic attacks, a lot of illusion based thing, and then mind control being able to control your allies to give them extra attacks, being able to control enemies to force them to attack or to stop them from attacking. Lots of other really, really fun kind of illusion-based things and mental manipulation style things with the telepath, in addition to the ability to like read thoughts and clairvoyance, all of the kind of out of combat stuff that you would use for that. Like, really, really cool character. And then again, the multi-disciplinist would have access to lower level abilities of all three schools. They just wouldn't get the really cool higher levels of stuff. And yeah, I think that would be a massively cool character to play, significantly better than the sign that they're introducing right now. However, there is something kind of interesting. In addition to this Psion in this playtest material, they introduce 10 new feats, which all have a keyword associated with them: wild talent. If you've been listening to me rambling for the almost hour I have been, you will recognize that term because that was used in Dark Sun. Wild talents were the kind of base psionic abilities that every single person on Athos had. They called them wild talents. In 4th edition, there were specific wild talents. If you create a Dark Sun character, you choose a wild talent. So the fact that they're introducing wild talent feats, and the only thing about wild talent feats that is really explained in there is you can only ever pick one wild talent feat. All of them have the prerequisite of wild talent. You cannot have any other wild talent feats. And for the most part, they're really boring. I'm not particularly fond of them. But they are what they are. So with the wild talents, I think Wizards of the Coast is hinting that they might be trying to bring back Dark Sun, which both terrifies me and excites me because I am a huge Dark Sun fan. I love Dark Sun. It was one of the first D&D properties that I ever learned about. It got me hooked when I was a very young child, and ever since then I have loved everything about Dark Sun. It is amazingly fun and cool. However, D&D 5.5 has not impressed me thus far. The only book that I think was really worth the money was the Dungeon Master's Guide, and it had nothing to do with the new 5.5 stuff and everything to do with the fact that they actually wrote a book that would teach you how to be a GM instead of simply assuming you already knew how to do it and giving you a bunch of tools that are useful. I don't think the DMG, the 2014 DMG, is a bad book in any way, shape, or form. There's a lot of really great stuff and a lot of tools in there that a lot of D&D, a lot of GMs in general that complain about 5th edition not having certain aspects in it. It does. It's all in the Dungeon Master's Guide that they refuse to read because, well, I am a Dungeon Master. I don't need to read about how to be a Dungeon Master. I'm already an amazing Dungeon Master. So I shall never read this book. And then they complain that they have to homebrew stuff that's already been introduced in the game in that book. So I don't think older versions of the Dungeon Master's Guide were bad in any way, shape, or form. They just didn't teach you how to be a Dungeon Master. They were just a little toolbox for Dungeon Masters that already knew what they were doing to be able to use more things. Like, that's the only purpose of the Dungeon Master's Guide. Also, they generally would also have magic items in them. So the people that are now running Dungeons and Dragons, because both Perkins and Crawford are gone, I do not have the confidence that they would be able to update Dark Sun to 5th edition in a way that doesn't completely ruin the setting. And I'm not one of those people who's like, oh, if there's not racism and racial stereotypes that are specific, like incredibly outdated. I'm not going to play it. It's not that. It's the idea that Dark Sun is not supposed to be happy. You're not supposed to have happy endings in Dark Sun. It is post-apocalyptic. It is hopeless. The entire point of Dark Sun is the bad guys won and keep winning. And modern 5th edition doesn't like that. Not only do they always want the end result of any interaction to be the good guys win, the bad guys aren't allowed to win. Over and over and over and over again, we see situations where they just create bad guys, either that their win condition doesn't make sense, so it's literally impossible for them to win, or they stack the deck so heavily in favor of the player characters that there really is no other result other than the bad guys lose and the good guys win. And that's not how Dark Sun works. Dark Sun is built on the idea that not only did the bad guys win, but there really aren't any good guys anymore. There are people that are less bad, and there are situations where you can get what you want, but in general, like, Dark Sun is the epitome of a zero-sum game. If you win, somebody else has to lose. And a lot of times, because the bad guys have significantly more resources, they're not the ones that are going to lose the vast majority of the times. It's going to be other not bad guys. And so a lot of Dark Sun is making tough choices. Do I want to do this thing that will help out these people by hurting these people? Do I want to basically do the thing that I don't want to do, but, you know, do I have to lose in order for other people to win? Somebody always has to lose, and a lot of the times it's not going to be the bad guy, because they just have so much, and they have so much control that even when they lose, they win, because they find ways to shift the losses to someone else. Doesn't that sound kind of familiar? That's what Dark Sun is, and I don't think the current writers of D&D are willing to create a world like that, because they simply haven't done that thus far. With a few very, very rare exceptions, there was a few things in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft that had that feeling of, well, no, because this is a horror setting, you don't really win, you survive. But even then, you still get to win. If they reintroduce Dark Sun, it needs to have the idea of, no, you're not really good guys, you're less bad guys. And even when you're doing good, somebody is going to get into trouble. And I don't think they have the writing ability for that, because again, a lot of the people that are running WotC right now and running D&D specifically just don't have the experience necessary to write such difficult things to write. And writing stories like that is very, very hard. We intrinsically inside, especially if you've grown up in a place where you have had to deal with bad people getting good things, which is how it works. Bad people get good things all the time. Good people also get good things. Don't think that I'm saying that the world is evil and everyone is corrupt. No, there's a lot of good people that have succeeded. There's also a lot of bad people that have succeeded. There are good people that have done bad things to succeed, and there are bad people that have done good things to succeed. And there are good people that have done bad things and failed, and there are bad people that have done good things and failed, and there are bad people that have done bad things and failed, and there are good people that have done good things and failed. Like, the world is not this neat little story where, you know, you're the hero and everyone you don't like is the villain. But we do have this kind of intrinsic need to define people as either good guys or bad guys. And we always want the good guys to win, and we always want the bad guys to lose. And that's what escapist fantasy is supposed to give you. But that's not what Dark Sun is. Dark Sun isn't escapist fantasy. You know? And I just don't think they have the ability to do this. Now, I mentioned in a previous video, there is currently a situation because of how things are going on D&D Beyond. WotC could literally fuck off for the next 5 years, and D&D 5th edition would still be going strong because there are so many third-party publishers making great D&D content, and now they're allowing it to be sold effectively on the official Dungeons & Dragons store. D&D Beyond is the official Dungeons & Dragons store. And so because of that, I had recommended before, give people that have absolutely no reason to be leading a project, give them a project to lead, and then let them fail at it so that they can learn things. I'm all for that, but don't do that to Dark Sun. Let them create their own shit. Don't ruin something else that has decades of lore and experience just to give people a chance to fail. There are so many better ways to give them chances to fail and learn than ruining Dark Sun. So I'm going to say this right now. If Wizard of the Coast resurrects Dark Sun, 100% I am buying the book. And if they fuck it up, that will probably be the last D&D 5th edition book that I buy. Like, this for me, this is their final chance. They burned me a little bit with the triple book, with the triple core books. 2 of the 3 were just not worth the money. I'm waiting to see how the new Dragon's Adventure book goes. I'm probably going to pick it up once I have money for it. Probably going to pick it up to see how it does. And I'm interested to see what the Forgotten Realms dual campaign setting guides are. There's a GM one and a player one. Those I'm interested in as well. But based on the Unearthed Arcana that we've seen, I'm not holding my breath for them. They might be interesting. I'm thinking they're going to be along the same lines of the same stuff that we've been getting from 2024 5.5 D&D, which has been lackluster at best. So those stuff, I'm still willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. But if they resurrect Dark Sun, I'm 100% buying the book. I will probably get the physical and digital bundle so I can have both versions of it. And if they fuck it up, I'm done with 5th edition. I will have purchased my last 5th edition book, and whatever else they want to do with the system is perfectly fine. I'm done. I have been waiting far too long. Again, the last version of Dark Sun we got was 15 years ago. It has been over a decade and a half since we've had anything Dark Sun. So they want to do Dark Sun. All the power to you. You guys fuck this up. I'm done. Anyway, interested from hearing from you guys. First of all, what do you think of the Psionicist that we built? Do you like the idea? Do you not like the idea? Do you think what Wizards is doing with the 5th edition Psion, the idea of, well, we're just going to let them, cast spells, but do it in a slightly different way. Do you think that's perfectly fine? Do you think my system is just too complicated? Let me know in the comments down below. And then your opinions on the idea of Dark Sun coming back. I know we've had the creator of Dark Sun say flat out, no, Dark Sun's not coming back because converting it to 5th edition with all of the issues that 5th edition writers have with kind of icky subjects, there's too much ick in Dark Sun on purpose. So we don't think it's coming. Well, now it's looking like they might be doing that. So what are your opinions? Do you think they're going to fuck it up and try to, like, I don't want to use wokeify because it's such a stupid term. It doesn't mean anything. But do you think they're going to try and kind of water it down and turn it into the other 5th edition properties where the good guys always win, the bad guys are always bad? There's never bad guys. You can't understand them. They're just evil things that don't make sense. Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, it's all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.